Skarner, my boy, it has been 3,000 years. The patience, the perseverance, the massive amounts of copium that Nicky Boy no doubt OD'd on several times over that got you to finally be acknowledged by Riot and finally receive a rework that came
too late. 15 years too late.
In all seriousness, I think I speak for most of us when I say that visual gameplay updates are far more exciting than new releases. One, because it's interesting to see how Riot plans to modernize the champion's gameplay based off an existing premise, and two, because it feels really weird to have a champion like Tryndamere exist in the same environment as Cassante. Skarner's gone through enough iterations at this point that he almost feels like Ryze, to be honest. Having talked about him in 2 separate videos, I'm hoping this will be the last time we'll ever need to change him, although given he's received an entirely new visual design and an almost entirely new set of abilities, I have high expectations for this VGU. More than any other, I'd say. Let's not waste any more time and talk about Skarner's rework. Has he gotten 200 years, or have they found a way to modernize him while keeping him fair and fun to play and play against? The gist of Skarner's playstyle prior to his VGU was that he was a juggernaut who excelled at consistent damage, tempo, map control, and of course, lockdown. His Impale was arguably one of the most iconic abilities in the game, being the only suppression wherein the caster could actually move prior to Tahm Kench and open up the door for lots of skill expression in teamfights. The problem was that there were so many elements about him that were either inconsistent or could be better performed by other champions, and the nature of his spires almost exclusively contained him within the jungle unless you were one of the rare few who enjoyed playing him as a top cheese pick. I always considered Skarner a frontline base, but at the same time it can be hard to see him that way. Don't get me wrong, he can take a lot of punishment in addition to dealing a lot of damage himself, but most of the time I'd imagine players feel more secure having a Maokai or Zac on their team owing to their greater durability and more explosive impact in a fight. The reality of his old iteration was that he was stuck between 2 different jobs, scrapping like a juggernaut while locking down enemies like a tank, splitting him into 2 different roles. Now a hybrid between tank juggernaut is certainly doable, it's not like a warden skirmisher, which are 2 fundamentally contrasting purposes. However, you do run the risk of the champion in question doing too much damage or being too tanky all the same, which has me a bit worried. Old Skarner wasn't that problematic because no one played him and he was too janky, but if new Skarner becomes a high-profile jungler, then they'll have to be very careful with finding that middle ground between being tanky but not too tanky and being a DPS threat but not too threatening. That's my concern from a practical standpoint, but we also do have to look at it from a design perspective because Skarner used to have a history for having either too much damage or being too tanky or both, and if they want to make that more fair, it might come at the cost of his identity. Abandoning the Crystal Spire mechanic altogether, his passive is now Threads of Vibration. When dealing a combination of 3 basic attacks, Q, and or ultimate, he does a big chunk of % health damage to the target with there being no on-target cooldown, meaning it's functionally a 3-hit passive like Vi's Denting Blows or Vayne Silver Bolts, only it can proc off abilities too. At a surface glance, I think it's a very fair passive to have. I did see some of Skarner's abilities ahead of time and he doesn't strike me as a very fast attacker. This is just to ensure a consistent stream of DPS for long drawn out fights, and I'm all for it since it can easily be balanced by raising or lowering the % health damage. Shattered Earth empowers his next 3 basic attacks to gain bonus attack speed and deal AoE damage, kind of like a Tiamat passive. The final attack will deal a huge earthquake at the point of impact, slowing all enemies and dealing a chunk of % health damage on top of the % health damage from his passive. Currently with the numbers they have on the PvE, it's 16% plus up to 12% for a total of 28 with his Q and passive combined. Not only that, but his 3 basic attacks themselves deal a total of 18% of Skarner's bonus health as damage. What Skarner can also do instead of consuming 3 basic attacks is to instead recast his Q, throwing the boulder he picks up to act as a projectile, essentially behaving as the final basic attack. Okay, a very simple ability in concept, but quite a bit to break down. On paper, the premise of this attack is awesome. Skarner always struggled with a lackluster neutral game. I'm not implying juggernauts need a strong neutral, but compared to champs like Darius, Volibear, Udyr, and Nasus who can run you down, Skarner only had the same stick potential when he was fighting in Aspire, and so if they're squaring off in lane, he had no way to pressure opponents. Shattered Earth in relation to Crystal Slash is very reminiscent to what they did with Cho'Gath's Vorpal Spikes. Instead of making it a consistent DPS tool that took way too long to deal damage, they condensed it into 3 attacks for more immediate impact so that Skarner could play more towards trades. Having the extra property to launch the bolter affords Skarner a modicum of neutral pressure in the event he can't get up close to attack, which has me believe this might open up the possibility for Skarner to be a top laner as well. Not sure about that yet. The damage does have me raising an eyebrow though. Tanks can't afford to build DPS since, they have to build tank, so they're given % health damage to allow them to still be relevant in the mid to late game. But when you deal too much % health damage, that can lead to a repeat of Ornn. If you guys remember Ornn when he first came out, he did like 25% health with his W, then another 25% health with Brittle, then with his ultimate he got Brittle 2 more times for another 25% each, so he literally dealt like 100% max health damage to all targets. People complain that Mundo's Q does too much, but in his defense, it's only single target and it's also current health, not max health. Skarner's Shattered Earth in tandem with Threads of Vibration can let him deal huge amounts of AoE max health damage. He does have to get 3 attacks off, but it does feel like it could get impressive. Although Q was his only source of damage, and it's the same here, so maybe it's to account for the rest of his kit not doing that much damage. I like to clarify though that I'm a big fan of his new Q. It is far more interactive than Crystal Slash. Moving on though, we have his W, Seismic Bastion. Crystalline Exoskeleton was a shield that gave him rapid movement speed, making him a speedy boy, but Seismic Bastion actually deals a small chunk of damage before gaining a shield, and instead of speeding him up, he slows all enemies down. 8% max health is a pretty small number for a shield, but at max rank the cooldown drops to 6 seconds, a much shorter cooldown than most of the shields in the game. Plus, Skarner will basically be building full HP anyway. Expectedly, W is the least interesting part of his kit. Now comes the actual interesting ability, Ixtal's Impact. This is the one that caught everyone's attention. For just under 3 seconds, Skarner enters a Scion Ultimate Nunu type interaction that lets him travel forward, including through walls, ramping up in speed as he goes along. If he comes in contact with any champion, they get suppressed and move along with them for either a second or until they collide into a wall. So the total suppression never goes beyond 1 second, and if he collides into a wall, that champion takes damage and gets stunned for 1.5 seconds, essentially totaling 2.5 seconds of suppress and stun in total with his E. This is cool, it's a really damn cool ability. Maybe when on the receiving end it can be kinda scary to suddenly see a man-eating scorpion dig through the wall and drag you into another wall, but this isn't as scary as it looks. For one, unlike Shadow Assassin Kayn, who you only have like a quarter second to react to, Skarner moves pretty slowly at the beginning and can only steer as much as Nunu's W, and only when he grabs onto a champion. So fast target can easily step out of the way just like they would a Scion ultimate. Landing Ixtal's Impact will be difficult if the enemy sees you coming. In other words, counterplaying Skarner is as simple as just using wards and map awareness. He's also not CC immune during this dash, so anyone with hard CC or disruption can screw him over pretty easily. Unlike Nunu, whose W snowball is a massive disjointed hitbox in front of him, I'm pretty sure you can stop him with things like Pantheon Stun, Gragas Body Slam, and whatnot, so it is sort of like a channel ability. You can think of this as Kayn's Shadow Step if the godforsaken ability was actually balanced. I appreciate that they made the movement mechanic similar to Scion and not free movement. Really sells the idea of drilling through terrain to get to the other side. Something to note of with Ixtal's Impact is that it doesn't necessarily require you to go through a wall. If you're fighting someone in lane and just so happen to be next to a wall, you can treat it almost like a poppy dash, making Skarner a very positional awareness demanding champion for both the person playing him and the person playing against him. 2.5 seconds of total CC can be very dangerous if he has backup. Last but not least, his trademark Impale. Skarner marks an area in front of him, and after a 0.75 second delay, up to 3 enemy champions still within the area get dragged to him and suppressed for 1.5 seconds, during which he can move around just like his old version, only now he can't turn around anymore, he stays in the same directional orientation. My theory behind why they did that was to prevent teammates from accidentally missing their follow-up because the Skarner player turned around and pulled the target more than they were intending to. Just like they did with Rework's ultimate, they removed the instant point-and-click activation in exchange for more impact and use cases. Skarner's ultimate can lock down 3 enemy champions for 1.5 seconds. That's actually insane. However, the 3/4 of a second cast time gives enemies just enough of a buffer to flash, dash, or even walk out. To account for this, they gave Skarner a guaranteed way to combo into Impale for one champion thanks to his E, which is an important element to have in a champion's kit, much like how Warwick has Primal Howl to guarantee infinite duress. It's starting to make a lot more sense why Skarner has a slow on his Q and W now to make it easier to land his new Impale. They essentially took away all the movement speed buffs he used to get and replaced it with a bunch of slows, more specifically AoE slows. With a longer cast range, he can also pull enemies over walls now, so in addition to the opposing team wanting to ward over walls to keep an eye on Skarner's E, they also have to watch out for Skarner pulling them through a wall too. I would say the main positive about Skarner's new kit is that barring his W shield, he has multiple uses for each of his abilities, giving him a higher skill ceiling and therefore greater potential to be used in higher elos. His Q can be used either for quick trade damage or as a projectile, the latter of which can enable him to catch up to enemies who are running away, poke in neutral, or use it as cover fire by slowing down enemy pursuers. However, I was told that the cast time for both picking up the boulder and throwing it kind of ruins that a bit. His E can be used for traversability, navigating the jungle more efficiently and giving him more avenues to gank a lane instead of just walking the river. But you can also use it as an escape or engage option as well. Unlike Shadow Step, Ixtal's Impact does not cancel early if Skarner's not inside a wall, so you can use this to run down a lane faster just like you saw on screen. Finally, just like I described, Impale can grab more than one champion, making him way more teamfight oriented, and being able to pull enemies through walls can add more surprise factor. I think this version of Skarner leans into more of a tank than a juggernaut, to be honest. He certainly deals a lot of damage, but with the mountain of soft and hard crowd control in his repertoire, I think he's much more of a frontline base than a lockdown champion, which in some scenarios is an upgrade and in others a downgrade. He does raise a few red flags though, as mentioned already, though the bulk of his DPS is condensed into his Q and realistically you only get to proc his passive once per rotation, this guy can do a lot of damage. If he builds ability haste, he can achieve rotations even faster and get shields faster. Again, juggernauts are supposed to be threatening enough to where you can't ignore them, but personally I'm always apprehensive about tanks having multiple sources of double-digit % health damage. Conceptually, the way it's applied is well executed. It still maintains the feeling of consistent DPS that the old Skarner was known for, but now it's more applicable in traits. I just wonder if he might be a repeat of Vorn where he does too much damage while being too tanky. Second issue is that the utility part of his kit, both Ixtal's Impact and Impale, despite their wider range of use cases and potentially greater influence, feel like they were improved in some ways and downgraded in others when compared to Fracture and Old Impale. Thanks to the interactions with his ulti and Q, you could do some really fun combos like Double Fracture and Impale for 4 seconds of hard CC, which is how Skarner top players cheesed unsuspecting lane opponents who got a little too close to their tower. Ixtal's Impact gives Skarner more macro pressure, but I think Fracture gives Skarner more, I suppose, freedom, if that makes sense. To be blunt, I think Ixtal's Impact feel like it's a bit too impractical, as in it's going to be used less for the wall ganking and more for punting someone into a wall when you're already next to them as if you were Poppy. Skarner's old Fracture had a mind game aspect to it. As for Impale, yes you can nab through champions, but Impale kind of got nerfed in my opinion. Old Impale was so impactful because of how fast Skarner could get. If you had passive plus W speed up plus Deadmans plus Face Rush plus Ghost, in 1.75 seconds, Skarner could drag you really far away from where you were standing. That was the fun part of the champion. With current Skarner having barely any movement speed and the duration shortening to 1.5 seconds, you don't really get anywhere. So it's almost exclusively a lockdown tool now instead of a displacement. You can't beeline for a target then drag them all the way back to your team. You also can't change your direction anymore, removing that aspect of him. One of the most enjoyable parts of playing Skarner was the speedy lockdown aspect he had. Now that's gone and replaced with, I guess, traditional engage. There's a part of me that can't help but wonder if they maybe went too far with the trade-off. Yes, QWE and Ultimate gives Skarner more ways to play the game than old Skarner ever could, but they made him slower and clunkier in the process. People who never played Skarner before will now have a practical incentive to pick him up, but is it just me or does this not feel like Skarner anymore? Another thing about Skarner that made him so uniquely enjoyable was that one game you can go full tank and be your frontline, another game you can go damage and shred enemies to pieces. This Skarner forces you to go full tank and forces you to be a frontline base. You're certainly a much more effective frontline base than old Skarner, but you lost that entire other aspect of him. At first when I saw Shattered Earth and Upheaval, I thought they preserved his dynamic nature, but they kind of nuked that other half of his identity. Maybe I'm just being pessimistic about this, but compared to Fiddlesticks, Volibear, and Nunu, who were the creme de la creme when it came to visual gameplay updates, new Skarner doesn't feel like old Skarner. Instead of taking his existing kit and retrofitting them into a modernized kit, from my point of view, they designed a new kit and then simply tweaked it in a way to have stuff that looks like Skarner, such as Impale and Seismic Bastion. I'm actually really curious as to what Skarner mains think about the rework. For the sake of clarity, I like the gameplay. From a pragmatic standpoint, I think Skarner might become more meta relevant now that his moveset has more playmaking potential and a higher impact ceiling overall. But from a design standpoint, a part of me feels as if they missed the mark on what Skarner was all about. It's like Aatrox. New Aatrox has a fantastic design that's so much more practical than old Aatrox, but the design feels so different that you can't even call them the same champion anymore. To their credit, Skarner was in need of radical changes to fix up his gameplay, no one can deny that. It's not like Fiddlesticks and Volibear who already had fairly cohesive gameplay beforehand and just needed a touch-up. I wonder though, did they strip away more than what was necessary? What do you guys think? I'm torn. I'm happy with this in the sense that they had an image of the champion and executed on it very well, but disappointed that they traded the speedy, funky nature of Impale for a more practical yet slow and plodding tank. Maybe I'm just too biased in favor of old Skarner. Regardless, let me know in the comments down below if you agree or disagree with my stance on this. Apart from that, if you enjoyed the video, it would be great if you could leave a like and subscribe. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at Vars, join my Discord server, and check out my other champion first impressions videos if you haven't yet. But till next time, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.